welcome back to another video. My name is Jai, and I hope everyone had an amazing holiday season. And I am back with Mr. Ballen, and this is disturbing photos of a monster moments after this evil act. So yeah, I really love Mr. Ballen. He's a great storyteller. It just never gets boring with him. Yeah, so this is Mr. Ballen. So sit back, relax, get your snacks, get comfortable, get cozy, whatever you are, get cozy, get your snacks, and let's watch.
Today, I'm going to share 3 stories that each have a very iconic, disturbing photograph that is tethered to that story. And at the end of each of these stories, I'll show you that photo. And some of these photos are truly astounding. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place because that's all we do. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to host the like button at your house for a big dinner party. But when they show up, don't let them inside. Instead, simply tar and feather them. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the morning of October 21st, 1990, a 30-year-old man named Lee Hunsho and 3 of his friends hiked up Bilu Mountain, which is located in northern Taiwan. Now, by this point, the group had already been hiking for several hours, and so they were quite tired. I mean, Lee's legs absolutely burned, but Lee and the others kept on pushing until they reached the top of this rocky ridge. They all stopped and were able to catch their breath for a minute. So Lee was a bank manager, but he was also a very outdoorsy person, and he'd been wanting to do this hike up Bilu Mountain for a long time, because it was sort of like a rite of passage for hikers in Taiwan. It took an average of almost 8 hours to get to the top and back down again, and the terrain could be really rough. As a result, it was considered one of the most challenging hikes in all of Taiwan, but despite that, it was also a major tourist destination that was usually really busy, with lots of people attempting to do this hike. But on this particular day, for whatever reason, the friends had not seen anybody else on this trail. No one. And I mean, the weather was good, it was a weekend, I mean, there was really no good reason for nobody to be here. But they had the mountain to themselves. So Lee and his friends, they stood on this rocky ridge and caught their breath, they had some water, they had a couple of snacks, and then it was onward, because they were not at the summit yet. I mean, this was a beautiful lookout point they were at, but they still had some pretty difficult climbing ahead. And so on they went, very excitedly. They're making their way towards the top. This is something they were all really excited about. And eventually, they reached this section of the mountain that was sort of famous amongst tourists because it was a really, really steep section where the only way to get up was actually to climb a rope. There was a rope anchored into the mountain where, hikers had to grab the rope and walk and pull themselves up this section. It was like this kind of cool part that made you feel really rugged. And so when the men got to the spot, they all wanted to make sure there was a picture of them navigating this particular terrain. And so one by one, each of the men got on the rope and sort of paused at some point and turned around and made sure to get a cool picture of themselves making this really difficult section of the climb. And then once they had all taken their picture, they actually went the rest of the way up the rope and continued all the way up to the summit. And once they were on the summit, the friends actually didn't spend a whole lot of time there. I mean, remember, it takes almost 8 hours to do this entire round trip, and so you're sort of fighting against the darkness. You want to get back down before the sun goes down. And so they were up there long enough to get a couple of pictures, and again, to take stock of the fact that basically no one is here. In fact, literally, nobody is here but them. It just seems sort of surreal. This is such a beautiful place, such a popular place. Why is nobody here? But it didn't matter. They got their pictures, they got their beautiful scenery, they had some more water and snacks, and then they began making their descent. Now, on the way up, the friends had all been together. There was no separation. They were all, one by one, navigating each part of the terrain and making their way up together. But on the return trip, they got pretty separated, in part because Lee was really dragging behind. He was just so tired from the ascent that he sort of told the others, like, hey, go ahead, like, you can walk ahead of me. We all know where we're going down, and we'll meet at the car, so just go on ahead. And so Lee's friends had done just that. They had sort of taken off and gotten a bit of a lead on Lee. And so after a couple of hours of the group sort of broken up, making their way down the mountain, the friends in the front, who had left Lee behind effectively, they stopped at a certain point and they realized like they were really huffing it down the mountain, moving really quickly, and they thought, you know what, Lee was really tired up there. Maybe we ought to just sit here and wait for a minute and let him catch up, and then we'll make the final stretch together. So the friends, they stop, and again, they're sort of looking around, thinking how weird it is that nobody else is here but them. Like, still, no one's come up the mountain, no one's come down the mountain, it's just them. It's very odd. They're sitting there waiting, and they're looking back up the trail, expecting Lee to show up any time, but he doesn't. And so eventually, one of the friends says, you know what, you guys stay here, I'm gonna go back up the mountain a little ways and just see if I can catch Lee and just walk with him back down. I'm sure he's just exhausted, and I'll help him sort of finish up the hike here. And so this one friend, he begins going back up the trail. And for quite a while, he's basically hiking back up the mountain. And the whole time, he's expecting he's gonna run into Lee. He has to. I mean, there were other trails that spidered off on the way down, so it was possible to take a wrong turn and sort of accidentally go down the wrong path, but for the most part, it was pretty linear. But as he's going up, he has not found Lee. And after a while, he's been hiking for like an hour back up the mountain and still no Lee. And he thinks, you know what, I can't do this. It's getting dark out. I have to go back and catch up with the other friends and just go down to the car, because at this point, it seems pretty likely that Lee must have gotten turned around and he must have taken one of those other pathways, and now he's probably ahead of me. He's probably down at the car by this point. And so this friend who had done the rescue mission turned around, went back down, linked up with the other friends that were still sitting there waiting for him. Together, they walked all the way down the trail and they got to the car. And when they got there, they're expecting to see Lee, but he wasn't there. And by now, the sun had basically set, and so the friends realized that, okay, like, we have a real problem here. I mean, clearly Lee didn't just get lost. He's still on the mountain somewhere. And like, what are we gonna do? It's about to be nighttime. Like, we can't go out there looking for him. And so they hopped in their car and they drove to the nearest police station to tell them to go look for Lee. And sure enough, there would be this huge search that was launched for Lee. And over the coming week, I mean, there were all these people out scouring the mountain looking for Lee, but they couldn't find him. And after a week of searching, the police had to call it off. And so Lee's friends and family were left with this huge question mark. Like, where did he go? What happened to him? I mean, the not knowing was in some ways worse than having found out he had died or something. And so there's this horrible uncertainty. Nobody really knows how to react to this. Do you grieve his loss? Maybe he's out there somewhere. And weeks turned into months, and eventually 4 months went by. And it was at that point that other hikers who were making their way up the mountain, they went off the trail on purpose. They were sort of off the trail for a bit, and they came across Lee's body. Now, the immediate reaction was obviously devastation for Lee's family and friends, but at least it seemed like they were going to get closure about what actually happened to Lee. However, when police began to investigate what actually killed Lee and why, they ran into a lot of anomalies. Number one, they did an autopsy and they couldn't figure out what killed him. There was no clear cause of death. Number two, where he was found, he was just kind of sitting there, with his back against the mountain. His pack was right next to him. It almost seemed like he just sat down and then just died in place. But again, there's no clear cause of death. There was no obvious, trauma he sustained. It certainly didn't seem like he fell. He didn't appear to have any obvious injuries. He just stopped at some point on the mountain and died. And on top of that, remember, Lee is like a seasoned climber. He had supplies in his bag that could at least last him for some time. He had a flashlight, he had a compass, he knew where he needed to go, down the mountain to the car. Why is he stopping? Again, no injuries, no clear injuries. Why is he stopping right there until he dies? It just didn't add up. But then there was another very strange development that sort of took the story in a totally new direction. One of the friends who was with Lee on that doomed hike, the one who had the camera that took pictures of all of them climbing up that rope and took pictures up on the summit, he went and got his pictures developed shortly after Lee had been found dead. And when he went through the photos from their trip, he could not believe what he found. Here is the photo of Lee posing with that rope. And if you... And if you notice, at the top of this segment, there's a person clearly up there looking down at Lee and his friends. But remember, they didn't see anybody else on the mountain the entire time they were there. And they certainly did not see that appears to be a young girl in a red jacket, right at the top of the segment they were in when they were taking those photos. They didn't see her. They would have absolutely communicated with her, but they didn't see her. And so they have this photo of this girl in Lee's picture, but she wasn't in any of the other photos. She was just in Lee's. And making this even stranger is there was this myth about this mountain, that there were these spirits on this mountain that would sometimes target hikers and lead them astray away from their friends off the trail, where effectively they would die. And wouldn't you know it, it seemed an awful lot like Lee was led astray and just sort of sat down and died on the mountain shortly after that picture captured this girl in red looking down at him. On the morning of August 8th, 2024, a 48-year-old Russian woman named Lyudmila Lazarenko sat on the floor of a bungalow deep in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. The bungalow was small and mostly just for sleeping, but it was connected to a communal kitchen and dining space. Lyudmila sat right in the middle of the bungalow on the floor, with her eyes closed and her legs crossed, and she was trying to meditate, but the sounds of the birds and the insects outside in the rainforest, plus the sound of her friend, Ivan Kuzmin, who was moving around in the attached kitchen, were making it hard for her to concentrate. And so Lyudmila finally gave up on meditating for right now, and she opened her eyes, and she looked out towards the kitchen, and she saw her friend, Ivan, who was 38 years old and from Ukraine, and he was busy brewing some tea. So Lyudmila and Ivan genuinely were just platonic friends. In fact, Lyudmila, she was married and had 2 kids, but she was out here alone. She and Ivan were actually part of what was a retreat out in the Amazonian rainforest with other people from all over the world who would come out here to meditate in nature and do some soul searching and hopefully come back to their regular lives with some additional perspective. Now, Lyudmila and Ivan had been going to retreats like this for the better part of 2 years. And that was actually how the two had met each other. And so they were just friends. They had this similar interest in going to retreats like this one. But there was one aspect of these retreats that really is the thing that drew Lyudmila and Ivan out to the rainforest. It was not just to sit in nature and just hope for the best. They would go to these ayahuasca retreats, where basically they were led through this meditative process where they would drink this very special tea that would sort of affect you in different ways. And, some people believed it sort of led you on this spiritual journey where, it's just this very powerful, soul-searching event where you come out of this thing feeling like a different person. If you've had trauma in your life, or you have, post-traumatic stress, or maybe you have trauma in your life that you're not even aware of, going through this style of retreat, these ayahuasca retreats, people have said has been very powerful and transformative. And Lyudmila, she lived a pretty typical life back home. She's a very busy mom and a wife, and she found doing these retreats really offered her a big reset. She felt like it was the one chance for her to kind of disconnect from responsibility and just be at peace. And Ivan, for the most part, felt very much the same way. He came to these retreats for similar reasons for his own life. And so here they are, they're out in the rainforest, and they're brewing up some tea, some ayahuasca tea, and they're in this bungalow, and they're getting ready to have this sort of meditative journey, but they were about to break a very important rule. So the man who ran this particular retreat out in this part of the rainforest, he made it explicitly clear to everybody who came out there that no matter how many times you've come to these retreats or similar retreats, you never, ever drink the ayahuasca without a shaman present. Basically without somebody else there to sort of help guide you through this process. If you were to do it on your own, who knows what could happen. And so everybody knew you cannot do this on your own. But Lyudmila and Ivan, they felt like, I get it. We're not supposed to do that. We know that. But we've done this so many times, and we know what we're doing. So let's just brew up some ayahuasca of our own, and we'll stay in our bungalow, and we'll drink it ourselves. We'll have our own experience. Nobody will even know. And so that's what Ivan was doing in the kitchen. He was making ayahuasca tea. And when he was done, he grabbed 2 mugs of this tea. He walked back over to Lyudmila, who was in the bungalow section. He sat down next to her. They drank their tea, and they both laid down on the ground and closed their eyes. A couple of hours later, the director of this retreat, who at the time was directing some group meditation not very far away from the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were. He was doing this group meditation when he heard a loud scream, and it was coming from somewhere near the bungalows. And instinctively he got up, he abandoned the group he was with, and he ran to the scream. And he saw one of his staff members. She was the one who screamed, and she was standing looking into the bungalow where Ivan and Ludmila were. And so the director rushes over and gets right next to this woman, and he looks into the bungalow. And immediately he knew two things. One, he knew for a fact these two, Ivan and Ludmila, had broken the rule. They had taken ayahuasca without a shaman present. And two, they had paid a horrible, horrible price. So ayahuasca is not just some herbal tea. It is a very powerful hallucinogen. And that's the whole point. People go out into the rainforest for these retreats and drink this hallucinogen in order to basically have perspective on their lives that you can only get by, introducing this chemical and causing yourself to hallucinate. People talk about almost seeing themselves from the outside looking in and like having this deeply spiritual event where you come out of your trip, that's what it's called, feeling like, oh my goodness, I know myself better now because of the hallucinations I just went through. But critically, the reason you have to have a shaman present in these retreats is really for safety. Because sometimes when you take ayahuasca, you have a bad trip, where you have all these hallucinations, but they're of horrible, terrifying things, but you can't differentiate them from reality. And so you're living in a nightmare. And a lot of times, these bad trips, it feels like something's going to happen to you. You're going to get hurt in some way, or somebody else is going to get hurt unless you act. But again, you're sort of out of your mind. And so you have these shamans present to protect you from yourself. But Ivan and Ludmila didn't have a shaman present. And so when they entered their trip, Ludmila was having a good trip, Ivan was not. He had a horrible trip. And in his trip, he believed that Ludmila had become possessed by evil spirits, and he needed to save her soul. And how was he going to save her? Well, he took a metal bottle and beat her savagely, and then he went and got a knife from the communal kitchen, and he proceeded to dismember her. That staff member who walked over and screamed, they looked in and saw Ivan looking at them, smiling, totally insane looking, still high on ayahuasca, and there are pieces of Ludmila all over the bungalow. Here is a picture that was taken of Ivan very shortly after that staff member discovered this bloodbath inside of the bungalow. Ivan is literally sitting on the ground, feet away from pieces of Ludmila. He's just murdered her savagely, and he's still absolutely tripping on ayahuasca. He looks like an absolute madman. Ivan would come down from his ayahuasca trip, and when he did, he immediately confessed to what he had done, and he was arrested for murder, and he is currently serving time in prison in Peru.
See, some people don't deserve ayahuasca. That's crazy. Broke the rules. Damn. Ugh.
Around 4 p.m. on August 20th, 1975, an 18-year-old boy named Michael McQuilkin hiked up a massive granite rock called Morro Rock, which is in Sequoia National Park in California. Michael's 12-year-old brother Sean and his 15-year-old sister Mary, Sequoia National Park, hiked up a massive granite rock called Morro Rock, which is in Sequoia National Park in California. Michael's 12-year-old brother Sean and his 15-year-old sister Mary were also on this hike with him, but currently they were lagging way behind, and you could just tell it was because they were tired. Now, the hike to the summit of Morro Rock was only a quarter of a mile, like this is a pretty short hike, but it was really steep. And Michael, despite only being 18, was sort of a pretty seasoned climber. I mean, he had just hiked 200 miles through the Sierra Nevada mountain range all by himself, and so for him, this terrain was no big deal, but, he knows his siblings are not big mountaineers, nor are they pretending to be, and so he thought, okay, I'll wait, I'll let them catch up. But as Michael waited, he started to notice that the sky was getting pretty dark. Now, he had checked the weather before coming out here, and there was not supposed to be a storm, but it was sort of undeniable that something's happening. This is not normal. It's getting pretty dark and windy. But Michael told himself that, you know what, maybe there's just a little pocket of weather and it'll pass. This can't be a big deal. And then eventually his siblings finally caught up to him, and then together, just a couple of minutes later, they were right at the summit. Now, by the time they were on the summit, they're looking out and the view is spectacular, but now it's becoming increasingly apparent to all three of them that this weather system, whatever's rolling in here, is pretty big and pretty bad. This is not some passing little thing. The sky is like pitch black at this point. But before they left, they just wanted to take a quick picture. And so because they didn't have a tripod or anything, they actually had Mary just take a picture of Michael and Sean. It was the best they were going to do. They couldn't really get a group shot. And so Mary snaps a photo of the two brothers. And then after taking this photo, they put the camera away and they're about to begin their descent when suddenly, all around them, everything turns bright white, and there's this loud cracking sound, and then Michael is thrown to the ground, and before he has any idea what's going on, he's looking over, and he sees his brothers on the ground, his sisters on the ground, and in fact, he sees smoke coming off of Sean's back. And that's when he realized they had just been struck by lightning. Now, Michael didn't really know if he was badly hurt or not, but he was able to jump right to his feet, and he felt like he was basically okay, and his sister also, she was able to stand up, and they're obviously both disoriented and shocked. But Sean, he's in a heap on the ground and is literally smoking. It seemed like he really took the brunt of this lightning strike. And so, Michael and his sister, they scooped Sean up, and together, they hustled down the mountain, they got in a car, and they rushed to the hospital. And somewhat unbelievably, despite taking effectively a near direct hit from a lightning bolt, Sean survived. He was covered in burns, but he and Michael and Mary all lived through this strike. But the reason we know about this lightning strike is not just because they survived. That's great, but that's not why we still talk about it today. The reason we still talk about it today is because of that picture that Mary took of Michael and Sean standing on the summit of this mountain. If you look at this picture, you can see that the two brothers, their hair is sticking up in all directions. And they noticed at the time that their hair was standing up, but they didn't know why. They thought it was kind of funny. That's why they're smiling in the picture. But what they didn't realize they were capturing in this photo is the very scary phenomenon that occurs when you're basically right about to be struck by lightning. The air around you, especially if you're in a very exposed spot, like the summit of a mountain, gets electrically charged, and your hair stands up right before you're hit by the bolt. And so now, this picture is now used by the National Park Service to show people what to be aware of when you're out hiking on these mountains. If your hair starts to stand up, you better move. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have hundreds of videos for you to binge right now. But if you're looking for a recommendation from me of that one video that's worth your time, well, it's this one right here. So give it a watch. Alright, until next time, see ya.
On Fiverr, you can find the perfect freelancer to help you publish your book. But you probably already know a guy. Who knows a guy who has a cousin who has a neighbor who could do it?
Yeah. This is very disturbing, creepy, and scary at the same time. Yeah, ayahuasca, nothing to play about. I just heard stories about it because I'm interested in doing it. Yeah, I heard it's very powerful, very spiritual and awakening. But I never had a story like that. Wowzers, they should have never broke the rules. If you're gonna go into something that's new, you can't just, how do you say it, go full in, you gotta be careful, be mindful of other people around you, and not just do your own thing, Very, very scary. And I do believe it was some spirits who probably going onto that Taiwan mountain. Yeah. Gotta be careful and lesson learned from the aliens. So yeah. That was from Mr. Ballen, disturbing photos of a monster. Boom, that was evil act. And be safe out there. Happy holidays, happy new year, and all that wonderful stuff. And Stay grateful, stay blessed. Until next time.